Hello guys, welcome to my channel JinnZaar. JinnZaar means Land of the Jinn. My name is Rizwan and I narrate the supernatural incidents you guys send me. If you would like to share your personal supernatural experiences with me, you can write to me or send me a voice note to my email address jinnzar@gmail.com. I will select the best story and narrate it. Today's story was sent to us by Junaid, so let's move on today's story. Hello Rizwan, my name is Junaid and I'm from Sialkot, Pakistan. I'm 31 years old and work as a manager in a leather factory. I belong to a middle-class family. My parents are retired school teachers, and to keep himself busy, my father has set up a small grocery shop 2 streets away from our house. We are 3 brothers and 1 younger sister, and I'm the eldest. Our house is a 3-story building in the old city. The ground floor has 2 rooms, 1 bathroom, 1 living hall and a kitchen. The first floor have 4 rooms, 3 bathrooms and a small hall where we have placed a sofa and TV. The second floor consists of an open rooftop and a small storeroom. My parents live in a ground floor room. Due to their old age, they find it difficult to climb the stairs, while my siblings and I live on the first floor. Throughout my life, I have never encountered anything related to jinns, magic, or supernatural entities. And to be honest, I never even believed in such things. But what happened to me 4 years ago made it impossible for me to deny the reality. I got married 4 years ago. My wife's name is Sarah, and her village is about 45 kilometers from our city. She also belongs to a respectable middle-class family. She has only one elder brother who got married 2 years before our wedding. Before our marriage, we were engaged for 6 months. In the early days of our marriage, I was very happy. We had a great understanding between us. My wife, she has a great character. She's beautiful, she has long and thick hairs, which I really like. After a few months of our wedding, we received the good news that my wife is pregnant. We all were very happy because this would be the first child born in our family. As usual, I would bring fruits or anything else my wife would need it on my way home. However, during that time, I started noticing something strange. My wife stopped offering prayers. Often, when I woke up at night, I would find her awake, silently staring at the ceiling of her room until I shook her and asked what was wrong. She would say, "Nothing, I just can't sleep." All of this seemed very strange to me. Sometime when I went to the kitchen, I would see her staring into the fire on the stove. I asked her many times, "Sarah, are you okay? If something is bothering you or if someone had said anything, please tell me." But she always would react as if everything was normal. Then one night, I woke up and found that she was not in bed. I thought she might be in the bathroom, but when she didn't return after 4 or 5 minutes, I got up to check. The bathroom was empty. That worried me a little. I stepped out of the room thinking she might be on the sofa, but she wasn't there either. I quickly went downstairs and checked the hall and the kitchen, but she was nowhere to be found. I checked the main door. It was locked from the inside. The only place left to check was a rooftop. I hurried up the stairs, and just as I reached the last few steps, I heard a humming sound. I stopped. When I listened carefully, I realized it was my wife's voice, but she was singing something in a language I didn't understand. Even though the rooftop light was off, but there was a dim glow from houses around, making it possible to see faintly without turning on the light. I quietly stepped on the rooftop and saw her sitting on the ground, facing the wall, combing her hair. I could not understand why she was behaving like this. As I stood there in shock, I felt as if someone had spoken to her. Though I couldn't hear the voice, she immediately turned around as if someone had just told her that I was standing behind her. She looked completely normal, but her eyes were filled with an intense anger as she stares at me. The situation, the late hour, and her strange behavior made my blood run cold. I anyhow gathered my courage and asked, "What are you doing here?" She replied in a completely normal manner, "I couldn't sleep." "Why are you awake? Come downstairs. You have work in the morning." Saying this, she got up and walked toward me. I was still frozen in my place. She took my hand and we returned to her room. Still lost in thought on my bed, at some point I fell asleep. The next day at the work, I kept thinking about what happened last night. The same incident happened 2 or 3 more times after that. Along with not praying, another strange thing started happening. Finding her hairs in the bathroom and most disturbing, in her food. I would get angry and tell her, "Please, tie your hairs while cooking." But things only kept getting worse. I started feeling anxious all the time, even at the work, worrying about my wife and her unborn child. One day my colleague and my close friend Qasim noticed my distress and asked me, "Junaid, what's wrong? You have been looking very worried for a few days. Is everything okay?" Because he was a good friend of mine, I told him everything. He advised me to arrange a Quran recitation at my home. It was possible that someone's evil eye had affected her. This seemed like a reasonable explanation to me. When I discussed it with my mother, she called Imam and some students from the nearby madrasa. The next day they all gathered and began reciting the Holy Quran. At that time I was at the factory, while my younger sister called me and said, Sarah got upset with mother and went upstairs to her room. Even though mother kept calling her, she refused to come down, and she has locked the door from inside. I became even more worried, but I told her, "It's okay, maybe she was not feeling well, let her rest." That evening, when I returned home from work, I was stirred by the sound of loud screams as soon as I entered the house. The screams were coming from the first floor. I ran upstairs and saw that my mother and younger sister were trying to hold Sarah while she was screaming hysterically. Her hair was disheveled, her face was red with rage, and she was repeatedly clawing at her stomach. I rushed forward and grabbed her tightly, but it felt as if she was stronger than me. Somehow I managed to restrain her, and eventually she fainted. My mother and sister let out a sigh of relief when they saw me take control of the situation. I assumed she was experiencing severe stomach pain, so I quickly picked her up and took her to the doctor. After a while in the hospital, she regained consciousness and seemed somewhat normal again. The doctor performed a full checkup and then told me, "Mr. Junaid, your wife has no medical issues. All her test results are normal, and there was no symptoms that would explain the severe pain you were describing." Hearing this made me even more anxious. We returned home that night. 2 days later, the same incident happened again. We rushed to the doctor once more, but he repeated the same thing. But this time he suggested, "I think your wife might be experiencing depression for some reason. This seems more like a psychological disorder. It would be best if you took her to a psychiatrist." Following his advice, the next day I took Sarah to a psychiatrist recommended by my father. After a brief session of questions and answers, the psychiatrist privately told me, "Mr. Junaid, your wife is mentally completely fine. However, I will prescribe some medication to help her relax." If the situation you describe happen again, you can either bring her here or call me. If I'm available, I will come over to your house as I live nearby." I thanked him and we returned home. I was extremely worried about everything that was happening. I requested my father to stay at home for a few days and not to go to shop, as it was important to have a male family member present at home. I also decided to leave work early whenever possible. 3 or 4 days later, while I was at factory in the afternoon, my father called me and told me to come home urgently as Sarah is having another episode. I left the factory in a hurry and also called the psychiatrist. He told me he would come over himself. Luckily, by the time I reached home, he had also arrived. The scene at home was terrifying. Like before, Sarah was clawing at her stomach and pulling her hair. But this time, she was also muttering something incomprehensible. Her voice sounded completely masculine, filled with an eerie intensity beyond words. We somehow managed to restrain her, and like before, she fainted after a while. I lifted her and placed her on the bed. The psychiatrist turned to me and said, "Mr. Junaid, this is not a psychological issue. Something else is going on with your wife. You should seek a help from a spiritual healer." I was shocked and asked, "What do you mean?" He replied, "Your wife is possessed by something. Perhaps a jinn or a supernatural entity. This is not a psychological disorder. I won't mislead you just to boost my practice." After the psychiatrist left, my father suggested, "Son, you should inform Sarah's family. They need to know what is happening. In the meantime, I'll call Shaji, a spiritual healer I know." When my father contacted Shaji, he assured that he would come tomorrow morning. I called Sarah's parents to inform them about the situation, but their reaction, I felt they were worried but not surprised, almost as if they were hiding something from me. This realization filled me with deep concern. They told me they would come the next evening. That night, when Sarah regained consciousness, I brought her downstairs so we could have dinner together and help her relax. But during the meal, she started behaving strangely, muttering to herself as she were talking to someone unseen. As she started eating, she devoured one bread, then another, then another. She kept eating without stopping. At first I thought she was just extremely hungry, but soon it became clear that something was very wrong. All of us were too shocked to eat. We just sat there watching in horror. She finished food meant for 6 people, including all the meat, and then started laughing in an eerie, unnatural manner. We were frozen in fear, unable to comprehend what was happening. Somehow, I managed to take her back to the room and put her to sleep. Later that night, when everyone was asleep, I lay on the bed beside her, too terrified to close my eyes. I kept wondering when the morning would come. At some point, I finally dozed off, only to be stirred awake by the sound of my own loud snore. I panicked and started looking around. Sarah was not on the bed. Fear gripped my heart and I felt my blood run cold. I quickly got up and instead of looking around, went straight to the rooftop. As I had expected, she was there. Just like last time, she was sitting on the ground with her face turned toward the wall, humming in a strange language. But tonight, her voice was deeper and carried an eerie intensity. As I stepped closer, I felt as if someone was sitting behind her, an old woman combing her hair. I couldn't see her face, but from her posture and movements, she seemed to be short in height and quite elderly. Her hands were unnaturally strange. Her fingers were exceptionally long. and her hands were so thin that they appeared to be just bones. I was still frozen in terror when suddenly the woman stopped combing Sarah's hair and Sarah stopped humming. She slowly got up. I immediately turned around and ran downstairs, straight to her bedroom. As I reached the room, I heard the sound of her footsteps coming down the stairs. I hurried inside, lay down on the bed and shut my eyes tightly. When she entered the room, my heart was pounding so loudly that I feared she could hear it. She walked straight to the bed and lay down. I could feel her staring at me for so long, but eventually she fell asleep. I, however, couldn't sleep all that night. Around 9 a.m., my father called me out. "Son, come downstairs." His voice brought me some relief. I quickly got up and went downstairs. Shaji had arrived, and my father had already explained everything to him. When we all went upstairs, I saw that Sarah was awake and sitting on the bed, as if she already knew everything. The moment we stepped inside, she started screaming hysterically. I rushed forward and grabbed her, but today she was even stronger than before. Somehow, I managed to hold her down. Shaji stepped closer and asked, "Who are you and why are you tormenting your daughter?" But Sarah didn't respond. Shaji began reciting something, and as he continued, Sarah's scream grew louder. My mother and father helped me to restrain her as Shaji kept reciting and blowing over her. Within moments, she suddenly went still, completely calm. We all breathed a sea of relief and thanked Allah. Shaji then turned to us and said, "She is under the influence of a jinn. I have recited verses that have eliminated the presence that was possessing her. So do not worry. Just take care of her and bring me some water. I need to recite Surah Al-Yasin on the water and make her drink." I quickly ran to the kitchen and brought some water while Shaji was reciting Surah Yasin. Then I woke up Sarah. She seemed normal. We all felt relieved. Shaji handed me the water and said, "Make her drink this." But the very next moment, we all were shocked. Sarah threw the glass against the wall which I given her, shattering into the pieces. Then she began screaming and pulling her own hairs, and this time even started slapping herself. Not only we were horrified, but even Shaji looked surprised at what was happening. He resumed his recitation and asked again, "Who are you and why are you tormenting this girl?" But Sarah continued hurting herself without responding. Shaji then took a lighter out of his pocket and lit a small flame. He told me to hold Sarah's hands tightly. As he continued reciting, he moved the flame beneath her smallest finger, close enough for her to feel the heat, but not enough to burn her. Still she gave no answer. After a while, she again fell unconscious. Shaji said, "This is not just one or two jinns. It's an entire tribe. Until they reveal what they want, getting rid of them will be nearly impossible. From the intensity, I can tell they were present during your wedding ceremony." Shocked, I asked, "What do you mean they were present during my wedding?" He explained, "If a woman has a history of possession before the marriage, then no matter what exorcism has performed, the wedding should not take place until an experienced scholar is present to ensure that no jinn are involved in the marriage ceremony. I am certain that something must have happened to your wife before marriage. Her parents must have sought treatment, and when they thought she was fine, they proceeded with the wedding, believing that their responsibility was fulfilled. However, when the marriage vows were being recited, the jinns must have been included in the contract. Once jinns are tied to a marriage, they do not leave until either the human or the jinn dies. I had never believed in such things, but after everything I had witnessed, I could not deny it either. I immediately called Sarah's parents, asking them to come over while Shaji was still here. About an hour later, her parents and brother arrived, looking deeply worried. When Shaji asked them, they confirmed it and said, about an year ago, both Sarah and her daughter-in-law were affected by something. We sought help from various healers, but every few weeks, they would once again become possessed, sometimes running out of the house, sometimes screaming and destroying things in the house. But the day your marriage proposal arrived, everything stopped. That is the reason we waited 6 months after the engagement before proceeding with the wedding to make sure nothing happens again. And when nothing did, we thanked Allah, believing our daughter was finally free. But when you called last night, we were terrified. Hearing this, I felt both heartbroken and convinced that Shaji was right. Then Shaji asked them again, the healers you consulted, did any one of them try to find out how all this started? Sarah's father shook his head and said, they tried but they couldn't uncover anything. Then Shaji asked, you have mentioned that Sarah and your daughter-in-law were both affected at the same time? Yes, her father confirmed. Shaji then explained, because the Jinn were part of the marriage ceremony, their hold on Sarah is extremely strong, making it difficult to remove them. The only way to find out the truth is to summon them through your daughter-in-law instead. We need to go to your house and conduct the ritual there. So it was decided that the next day, Shaji and I would go to Sarah's parents' house. However, for the time being, Shaji prepared a protective amulet and instructed me to put it around Sarah's neck. This will at least protect her for a few days, he said. I carefully tied the amulet around her neck. She was now peacefully asleep. The next morning, when she woke up, she was back to normal, but she was crying and saying, my whole body hurts. She sobbed, I feel completely exhausted, like my body is drained of all the energy. I comforted her and told her she didn't need to do anything but rest. Just keep your amulet on all the time, I reminded her. I made her some fresh fruit juice and ensured that she ate well before laying down to rest. Meanwhile, my father, brother and younger sister stayed at home, while my mother and I accompanied Shaji to Sarah's parents' house. When we reached there, we had tea and spoke to Sarah's sister-in-law. Her name is Safura. She got very scared and refused, saying that she didn't want to be involved in any of this. We pleaded with her and Shaji assured her, daughter, the Jinns have made Sarah their home. Even if they possess you for a while, they will not stay inside you. Don't worry. After much persuasion, she finally agreed. Shaji instructed her to wear strong perfume and made her sit on a chair, covering her with a white cloth. Before starting his recitation, Sarah's parents sat nearby, observing everything. After quite some time of continuous recitation, Safura suddenly screamed and the Jinn began to speak through her. When Shaji asked them a question, they remained silent at first, but the relentless recitation seemed to cause them immense distress. Shaji asked again, tell me, why are you troubling these girls? Why don't you leave them alone? This time, a chilling voice responded, it is their own fault. We come from a very distant land, but we were brought here by a sorcerer's dark ritual. He had performed his black magic near a mango tree not far from here, where he had tied ritual objects and hammered nails into the tree. That tree became a dwelling. An year ago, these two girls were throwing stone at it. Hearing this, I immediately suspected that they might be talking about the old mango tree nearby Sarah's father's farm, right beside the graveyard. The farm was less than a half-kilometer from their house. The Jinn continued. Some of those stones hit us, but since we were bound by the magic, we didn't retaliate. However, their misfortune that they didn't stop. One of those stones hit the ritual pouch, causing it to fall. They opened it and saw the bones and amulet inside. The moment they touched it, we became bound to them. Later, when the second girl got married, we attended her wedding, making her a part of our clan forever. Hearing all this, I couldn't hold back my tears. I loved my wife dearly. I wanted to beg them to let her go, but Shaji signaled me to stay silent. Then Shaji warned them, if you do not leave her, I will destroy one or two of you every day. Think carefully, I'm giving you a final warning. The Jinn responded, we are bound to her. No matter how many of us you destroy, more will come. However, if you agree to some conditions, we will stop troubling her. Before Shaji could respond, I blurted out, I accept every conditions. Just tell me please. Shaji glared at me in anger, but perhaps seeing my desperation, remained silent. The Jinn listed their conditions. First, she must not pray or read Quran except Fridays or Mondays. Second, she must keep her hair tied most of the time and never comb it after sunset. Third, she must not eat beef. Fourth, under no circumstances she visit a graveyard. Hearing these conditions, I was deeply troubled, especially for the first one. But despite that, I accepted, grateful that at least she would be safe. After that, Shaji recited prayers and blew over her, and the Jinn departed. After some time, Safura regained her consciousness. I thanked her and we returned home. Once we returned home, Shaji performed another protective prayer over Sarah and gave her a talisman to wear around her neck before leaving. I expressed my deepest gratitude to him. After this, for several months nothing unusual happened. Life returned to normal. Our first son was born. I was at peace and always ensured that Sarah followed every precaution to prevent the relapse of past events. However, sometime I would notice a minor things. She would suddenly get extremely angry, or her tone would change unexpectedly. These were the rare events and not alarming enough to raise concern. About an year ago, we received another piece of joyful news. Sarah was pregnant again. We were all overjoyed, but deep inside, my fear kept growing. The previous incidents had occurred just before the birth of our first child, and I didn't want the history to repeat itself, especially now that Sarah was about to become a mother again. One morning, as we were all gathered for breakfast, my phone rang. I answered it to hear Sarah's brother Farman sobbing uncontrollably. Through his tears, he said, "Brother, my mother has passed away." Shock overwhelmed me. I didn't know how to break this news to Sarah. I comforted Farman as best as I could and assured him we would come immediately before hanging up. When the family asked who it was, I quickly said, "Nothing important, just a call from the factory." Because I wanted Sarah to finish a meal first, so I waited. After breakfast, I gathered my courage, held her hand gently and said, "We cannot fight against God's will." She looked confused. I took a deep breath and told her, "Your brother called and your mother is no longer with us." Sarah was extremely close to her mother and loved her dearly. Upon hearing this, she burst into tears, crying uncontrollably. I held her, trying my best to console her. We all left immediately for her home. For me, watching Sarah weep was unbearable. But this loss was immense tragedy for her. More than that, I was deeply worried about her fragile state and was doing everything I could to support her. After Sarah's mother's funeral and burial, I decided to stay with her for a few days at her parents' so she could spend some time with her father, brother, and sister-in-law. I thought this might help her to recover faster. She kept crying, saying she wanted to visit her mother's grave, but I was hesitant as I remembered the condition Jinns had put to never visit the graveyard. I tried my best to convince her. She eventually fell asleep while crying. I stayed up that night beside her. However, I must have fallen asleep at some point. When I woke up in the middle of the night, I noticed Sarah was not in the bed. I panicked, checked the toilet, searched the whole house, but she wasn't there. Some relatives also were there, so I asked everybody, but nobody seen her. After searching the whole house, I noticed the front door was open. I had no idea what to do, where she would have gone. Could it be related to the jinn again? I had been so cautious and careful before. Anyhow, I woke up Sarah's brother Farman since he knew this area better than I did. Together we went outside and started searching. We were walking and looking around, and just as before we would reach graveyard, in the street light, we saw Sarah walking toward us. As soon as she saw us, she started crying. Perhaps because she couldn't hold herself back anymore and she'd gone to her mother's grave without telling anyone. Anyhow, I comforted her and I didn't see her anything over there. But when we returned to the room, I scolded her for doing that, though I didn't get too much angry because she was already going through so much pain and sorrow. But inside, I was terrified because the jinn had conditioned about not going to the graveyard. But I was a little reassured by the fact that almost years have passed. Maybe everything would have been okay now. But still, I decided that after a few days, we would return home and visit Shaji directly. But 2 days later, late at night, I woke up to a sound of someone's humming. A chill ran down my spine because I knew exactly what it was. But inside my heart, I cursed myself and Sarah. Why would she do this? I got up and saw Sarah sitting in the corner of the room, facing a wall, combing her hairs while humming. I was horrified, certain that the jinns had taken over again. Anyhow, I gathered my courage and went to her, grabbed her by her arm and shook her, saying, "Sarah, wake up." She was stirred and in a confused state asked me, "What happened? What I'm doing here?" Without explaining much, I led her back to the bed and managed to get her to sleep. Days were passing and I was counting down the days until we could return and speak with Shaji. I spent many sleepless nights. On the 10th day of Sarah's mother passed away, some students from a madrasa came to recite Quran at the house. Sarah's brother and I were busy making arrangements. The whole day was exhausting, and the next day we had to go back home. After dinner, we went to our rooms. I felt a little peace thinking about meeting Shaji tomorrow. That night, exhaustion took over me and I fell asleep quickly. Later at night, I woke up due to thirst and once again, Sarah was missing from the bed. It felt like she had been waiting for me to fall asleep. I didn't search around the house this time. I immediately checked the front door. It was open. I woke Farman up and we immediately went toward the graveyard, certain that she would be there. When we arrived, we started searching, and after a while, Farman touched my shoulder and pointed towards something. What I saw next was the most terrifying thing I ever have witnessed. Sarah was sitting by an old grave with few candles burning on it. As we moved closer quietly, we saw black cats sitting around her, a small clay pot filled with something like water or oil. She was wetting her comb with it and was running it through her hair while muttering in man's voice. When we looked closely, we realized the liquid was blood. I felt faint, thinking I would collapse, but I managed to hold myself together. We called her out, and upon hearing her voices, she stopped and turned around. Her face was so distorted with rage and terror that I cannot even describe it. She suddenly attacked me. Sarah's brother helped me, and together we fought to restrain her. She was incredibly strong, attacking both of us, yelling in malevolent male-like voice. After some struggle, she fainted. We took her home, but the amulet around her neck had disappeared. The next morning, before move for home, I called Shaji and explained him everything. Once we reached home, shortly after he arrived as well. I also brought Farman with me for assistance. Shaji tried for a long time to calm the jinn, but was unsuccessful. Then he said, "This time they won't leave so easily." He instructed us to bring a large block of ice and boiling water in a big pot. We did so. Shaji then had Sarah sit down and placed the pot with boiling water in front of her. He put a block of ice in her hands, making her hold it over the boiling steam. It caused her extreme discomfort and she screamed in pain. I was feeling so pain and pity, but this was necessary for her own healing. The entire house was echoed with her screams. After a few minutes, the cries began to change. It was Jinn. Shaji then addressed the Jinn saying, "It seemed you all want to die, all of you, because you have started tormenting this girl again." The Jinn, filled with rage and pain, screamed back, declaring they would never leave. Shaji continued to recite prayers, while my mother and sister also joined reciting Quran in the room. One of the Jinn screamed at my mother, "Shut up or we will kill your daughter too." This scared both my mother and sister, and Shaji ordered them to leave the room and continued his recitation. After a long recitation, the Jinn seemed to relent and agreed to leave, but set one more condition. He said, "They shall have to bring 3 black goats at the tree where they had thrown stones and to tie them underneath it tomorrow night. Then only we would return to the same conditions we had set." After agreeing, a little while later, Sarah fainted. Shaji instructed us to remove the ice very carefully as it might have stick to her hand. After that, he recited Surah Yasin on that hot water and told us to dispose it in the river later. He instructed us to go and find 3 black goats tomorrow, and tomorrow night we should go and tie them beneath the same tree. Farman said, "I will go with you as I know that place very well." The next day we struggled to find the goats, but we managed to find, and at the night we went to tie them under the tree. This was my first time in that place, and the mango tree that seemed ancient, exuding a strange, eerie feeling. It felt as dozens of eyes are staring at us. We quickly tied the goats and left without looking back, and on the way back home, we disposed the water in the river as Shaji has instructed. Once we got home, we all recited Al-Quran for a while Sarah was still asleep, and Shaji left. The next morning, when Sarah regained her consciousness, she felt very weak, was otherwise normal. I thanked Allah and warned her sternly to never engage in such actions again. A few months later, Allah blessed us with a daughter. It has been nearly 6 months, and thankfully, no such incident has happened again. We remain very cautious to never break any condition again. I pray daily that we may be freed from these wild creatures and live our lives without fear. Please keep us in your prayers. So friends, this was today's story. I hope you all liked it. I pray that Sarah is freed from those jinns. I have also heard that if the jinns attach themselves to a girl during her marriage, they will not leave her until her life. In fact, they will try to be part of her daughter's marriage as well, in order to cause prolonged suffering. May God protect all of us from such evil beings. I hope you guys liked the story. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Until next time, goodbye.